Welcome to This Explainer. You know, if you've ever watched the financial news or tried to read an economic report, you've probably felt like you were drowning in a total alphabet soup. We're talking GDP, GNP, NNP. They just get thrown around constantly. Well, today, we're going to decode that whole confusing jumble of letters. We're going to figure out exactly how a nation's true wealth is measured, and more importantly, how economists actually arrive at the most precise indicators of economic reality. So, what is the true wealth of a nation? It's kind of the ultimate question, right? And to answer it, we really can't just look at a single, flashy headline number. Instead, we're going to build our understanding step by step, dialing in our focus toward one very specific, highly revealing metric: gross national product at factor cost, or GNPFC. Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to hit the economic alphabet soup, check out the 3 core measurement lenses, dive into defining GNPFC, trace the money from nations to households, and finally, look at the limits of GDP. Okay, Section 1, the economic alphabet soup, decoding GDP, GNP, and NNP. We hear these acronyms constantly from politicians and analysts, but without the right tools to decipher them, they literally just look like a random scramble of letters. But here's the secret. They aren't completely different concepts at all. They're actually just variations of the exact same core idea, adjusted slightly depending on what you want to measure. To decode these terms, economists use 3 core dials, or lenses, to adjust their measurements. Think of them like filters on a camera lens. We have domestic versus national, gross versus net, and market price versus factor cost. By simply turning these 3 dials, we can isolate exactly what kind of wealth we're trying to observe. Moving right along to Section 2, 3 core measurement lenses, adjusting our view. To truly master this alphabet soup, we absolutely have to understand how turning these 3 dials changes our entire economic perspective. The first dial shifts our perspective from a strict geographic boundary to a residency-based boundary. So when we look at domestic product, we only care about where the production happens, inside the country's physical borders, regardless of who actually owns the factory. But when we switch the dial to national product, we care about who produces it. We're tracking the output of a country's normal residents, no matter where they happen to be in the world. To make this jump, we add something called net factor income from abroad to our domestic product. Basically, this adjustment takes the output from inside our physical borders and tweaks it to track the wealth created by a nation's residents globally. It subtracts the income that foreigners make inside our borders and adds in what our own residents are making abroad. Dial number 2. This one shifts us from gross to net. And honestly, this is all about acknowledging reality. Gross is the total production without any deductions. It's the raw output. But let's be real, machinery breaks down, right? Factory equipment gets old. When we subtract this inevitable wear and tear, what economists call depreciation, from our gross product, we arrive at our net product. It gives us a much more sustainable view of what we've actually gained. Now for Section 3, defining GNPFC. This is our ultimate focus. Let's see how our third and final dial, market price versus factor cost, builds this highly revealing metric. Let's look at how actual production costs, the factor cost, differ from the retail market price you actually see in the store. Why are they different? Well, government intervention. Say it costs 50 rupees in wages, rent, interest, and profit to produce a bag of rice. That's the factor cost. But if the government steps in with a 5 rupee subsidy, the market price drops to 45 rupees. Conversely, if they slapped an indirect tax on it, the market price would get pushed up. So this brings us to the formal definition of gross national product at factor cost, or GNPFC. This is absolutely crucial to understand. We define GNPFC as the sum total of earnings received by various factors of production, meaning all the wages, rent, interest, and profit by normal residents of a country in a year, without making allowance for depreciation. Basically, it's the pure resident earnings before wear and tear, looking solely at the payments made to the people and resources actually doing the producing. To find this mathematically, we use a really straightforward formula. We take the gross national product at market price, that's the total value of goods at prevailing store prices, and we simply subtract the net indirect taxes. And remember, net indirect taxes are just indirect taxes minus subsidies. By doing this subtraction, we're effectively stripping away the distortion of state intervention, the taxes that inflate prices, and the subsidies that artificially lower them.
This lets us see the true, unvarnished resource value of what a nation's residents have actually earned. All right, Section 4, from nations to households, following the money. We've built the big macroeconomic number, and we've isolated the true factor costs. But how does this massive aggregate filter down into the actual wallets of everyday citizens? Because a nation might look incredibly rich on paper, but that doesn't mean the households actually are.
Think of the journey of all this wealth as a giant, leaky pipeline. It starts at the very top with national income, and as it flows down toward the household, it slowly leaks. We lose corporate taxes, undistributed corporate profits, and government property earnings along the way, while simultaneously gaining things like transfer payments, stuff like pensions or national debt interest. We literally step down from the nation's total earnings. We narrow it down to private income, which strips out government enterprise savings. Then we drop to personal income, which is what individuals actually receive before direct taxes. And finally, after you pay your income tax and miscellaneous government fees, we arrive at the most personal metric of the whole bunch, personal disposable income. This final layer of the funnel is the actual, real-world spendable cash you have left over. And once you have your personal disposable income, you really only have two choices of what to do with it. You can either spend it, which is consumption expenditure, or you can put it away as household savings. That right there is the ultimate endpoint of the national income journey. Finally, Section 5, the limits of GDP, a much-needed reality check. Because as powerful and precise as these metrics are, even our finely tuned factor cost calculations, we need to be honest here. Why don't these massive numbers perfectly equal human happiness or total societal welfare? Well, think about it. If a country's GDP rises due to rampant pollution that requires massive, expensive cleanup efforts, or if they're building millions of dollars in tanks instead of baking bread, the economic metric goes up. The math literally says the country is growing, but the actual standard of living for the everyday person, it might actually be plummeting. Plus, a rising GDP means absolutely nothing to the average citizen if all that new wealth is just concentrated in the hands of a few top earners, masking severe income inequality. These blind spots are often called the 6 veils of standard economic aggregates. They completely miss the monetization gap of informal barter systems. They ignore the immense, incredible value of a parent raising a child at home, just because it's unpaid labor. And they completely fail to account for quality of life, like having adequate leisure time or good mental well-being. These things are absolutely essential to true human welfare, but they are completely invisible on a balance sheet. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a thought. The next time you hear a politician touting a record-breaking GDP or national income number, ask yourself, what invisible labor, what environmental costs, and whose quality of life are entirely missing from that official calculation? Thanks for joining me today, and remember to always keep looking beyond the numbers.